Hey everyone, my name is Charlie and today I would like to talk about the books that I read in April 2014. For the last few months I have been looking back at what I read in 2014, seeing if I can remember any of the books and seeing if any of them have stuck in my mind. For the most part this has been fun for me because it's at that time in my life when I was steering away from reading young adult literature and moving into more adult literature. So a lot of the work that I have talked about so far this year has been stuff that I don't have anymore or I don't necessarily look back on fondly. I do know that I didn't read much in April 2014. And again, I've been racking my brains as to why. Part of me wonders if it was the Easter holidays, because as I've told you, I had a manager that I didn't really get on with back then, and when the other shop assistant would be off, he would always make me work the full week, even though it wasn't necessary, just to stop himself from having to do any blasted work. There's every chance that I spent 2 weeks at work and didn't get the chance to read. But the first book I should mention is Nelson, which is a graphic novel that I forgot to put here and I'd actually read in March 2014. I do look on Nelson fondly because it set off my adoration of graphic novels in recognising that they don't all have to be comic books. They can be these fascinating epic tales. And what was strong with Nelson is that that book is a story where a different artist got to tell the story on each page. It just lent a different take on the character, and it was almost as though you were getting to see the story from all these different people's perspectives, and I found it fascinating. And indeed, Bob's Burgers, the TV show, much later has something similar with where one of their premiere episodes, it has various different animators give their take on Bob's Burgers, and that reminded me of Nelson when I first saw that episode. I cannot for the life of me remember the story of Nelson, but it is something that awoke a different sort of adoration for graphic novels and that form of telling a story. Then we have Throne of Glass by Sarah J. Maas. Originally I gave this book a favourable review despite the fact that I didn't like it, and the reason I did that is because back then I had been following the career of Sarah J. Maas since she was on a blog called Let the Words Flow, and she'd been talking about this book and everybody was talking about their own work on there. So you had Kat Zhang, Susan Dennard, Savannah J. Foley, other people whose names I've forgotten and I apologise for that. But Throne of Glass was the big success story from that. When Sarah J. Maas had been querying it, had been Queen of Glass, and it was this Cinderella who had become an assassin. Obviously it's expanded a lot more since then, and I honestly don't believe that the books that the author is writing now bore any correlation to the characters that she created way back then. I don't think that she expected it to become the beast that it has become. In reading some of the new books, the Crescent City books, I saw a writer who'd become so popular that they perhaps weren't editing themselves well, and there are plot holes and storyline and things written to seem badass when really they just seemed a bit cheap and weakened the story for me. I was so excited to read Throne of Glass because I'd followed this blog for years and I was getting to see this writer's success. Unfortunately, I didn't care for the book, but at the time I gave it a favourable review, which is just goes to show you shouldn't have trusted Charlie of that many years ago, because I can just remember thinking, oh god, I've supported these people for so many years, I don't want it to come back to bite me by now no longer actually liking the writing. And then I read Lirael by Garth Nix. I'm guessing that another reason I might not have read so much is because these two books took me so long to get through. If it takes me a long time to read a book, it generally means that I'm not enjoying it. Of course, there have been those cases where I've taken a book slower because it's been a classic or it's been a bigger tome, so that just takes me more time. But in terms of these books, it was honestly that I wasn't caring for the books, so I was also finding other things to do in my spare time than actually read them. And Lirael was the second book in the Old Kingdom series, coming after Sabriel. This was a series I had wanted to read for years. I got my parents to buy me when I was a teenager, which means at the point of me reading this book, I'd probably owned it for 7 to 8 years, because I can remember getting all 3 books from the Leek bookshop, and then my mother putting them away and giving them to me as a Christmas present, as I say, when I was a teenager. Do I remember much about this book? I remember a dog, and I remember the cover. I think that this is the one that also helped to inspire a fantasy novel that I then didn't go on to write. There are so many fantasy novels that I planned as a teenager and in my early 20s, and it just happened that when I started writing Our Doris, I pivoted down the lane of the comedy. But there are some fantasy series that I wish I'd continued to write, or fantasy novels that I wish I'd continued with. The one that I planned that was inspired by Lirael, and just a throwaway line in there, I sometimes wish that I'd continued, but then I don't know whether it was of its time. That was that. I only read 2 books in April 2014. I just talked about 3 today because I missed Nelson off. Now, it does seem that there's quite a lot of books read in May, so that's going to be fun to talk to you about when that comes around. But for now, that's all I've got, is that Charlie in April 2014 was a liar, and he wasn't yet reading things that he would continue to like. If you've read any of these books and would like to discuss them, then please feel free to do so. If you happen to be a fan of the books and I didn't like them, remember, opinions are like arseholes. You don't have to share them. One day I'll figure out what the actual saying is. But until next time, that is all.